Crimea at the weekend, when Russian ships, a navy, fired, well, actually it was the FSB, is the intelligence service boats, they fired on and seized 3 Ukrainian naval boats. In a moment, we're going to be joined by the Ukrainian ambassador to the UK, N.Galibarenko. But first, let's hear what the US has had to say overnight. This is a spokesperson from the US State Department.
You may ask, what can European governments do? Many governments have imposed sanctions on Russia for its actions in Crimea, in Ukraine. Not all of those sanctions, as I have been told and our experts have explained to me, have been fully enforced. So that is one thing that we can look for European countries to do more when we talk about doing more.
So that's the US State Department in Washington, D.C., from their Foggy Bottom headquarters there. We're joined by the ambassador for the Ukraine here in the United Kingdom. Ambassador, welcome to our program. The State Department there was kind of implying that the European allies are not fully imposing the sanctions against Russia they're meant to. Do you agree with that?
No, we are now on the stage when we are, of course, encouraging our European partners to take certain steps and not to, again, to publish statements that they are concerned or that they're deeply concerned or something of that kind. So now we have some quite positive feedback from the Commission Ukraine NATO in Brussels, also from the UN Security Council. So our next step is also to look at the G20 summit, which will be opened tomorrow in Argentina. And I think it would be very good if the European leaders, the UK leader also, I know it's difficult for Theresa May to speak to Mr. Putin, but still to encourage also him to stick to the international law in the Sea of Azov.
Now, the Sea of Azov has 2 important Ukrainian ports, and you do a lot of trade through this. The only way out is through the Straits of Kerch, and they're controlled by the Russians. They recently opened a new bridge, I think, across from Crimea into another part of Russia. What do you read as the Russian aims here? What do you think they're out to achieve?
Unfortunately, for me, it's quite obvious that after the annexation of Crimea in 2014, it's already 4 years ago, Russians started gradually to block our ships, and not only Ukrainian ships, but all international ships, from going into the Sea of Azov to the ports of Mariupol and Berdyansk. So they were using technical things like, for example, putting a big ship under the Kerch bridge,
under the bridge,
and just blocking the strait and creating a very big queue of ships. Or another tactics was to detain ships like for additional technical inspections or checks. And if you can imagine, if we are speaking, for example, about the ship which was carrying food, so another 3 or 4 hours of staying, it can be a disaster for all the business ties. So they were using like this technical step.
But what was their aim? What are they trying? Are they trying to provoke you? I mean, the Ukrainian Navy, I think you lost most of your Navy in Sevastopol,
yeah, exactly,
when Crimea was taken over by the Russians. So you can't afford a sea clash. But are they trying to provoke you into a clash?
I think they were trying also to show like who is the big guy in the house. So for us not to have any possibility in the future, like not to ask them beforehand in advance that we would like to pass through the Kerch Strait. Another thing is also to endanger the ports of Mariupol and Berdyansk, because
these are the 2 ports on Ukrainian territory.
Yes, exactly, and they already, witnessed the decline in their trade flow. So the ships now are trying to do everything in order to omit Ukrainian ports in the Sea of Azov. So I think that was the main message of the Russian authorities, like who is the guy in the house, who is the boss, exactly.
I've seen reports that the build-up of Russian tanks on the Ukrainian border has grown substantially in recent days. Can you confirm that? And how worried would you be by that?
It was also the statement of the President Poroshenko yesterday about the increase of the quantity of Russian tanks. And, of course, I do believe that our intelligence services and the information. And this one is also like another front. So we also witnessed this in the past. So Russians are trying, to give us a blow at different fronts. So infringing us in the Sea of Azov, immediately doing something provocative in Donbass. So I can expect something in the coming days about the economic cooperation. So at one point last year, they stalled all the transits through their territory, and we were blocked from transporting our goods to Kazakhstan and Central Asia.
Which had to go through Russian territory.
Absolutely. So, unfortunately, Russians are very sophisticated in creating something new all the time. And unfortunately for us, we are not so, rapid sometimes to provide a clear response to that.
What should the West's response be? Do we stand by Ukraine?
Well, I lived and worked in Russia for 3 years in St. Petersburg, and the ambassador is absolutely right. They're utterly ruthless. When they decide to come after you, they don't stop. I mean, I think what's happened here is that Putin has taken a hit because of his association with some very unpopular pension reforms and also the complete fiasco of the Skripal crisis. And when he takes a hit domestically, he looks for a distraction in his foreign policy. And this is a classic example of doing that. So I think we actually have to approach Mr. Putin as somebody that is weak, not who is strong.
And what would that mean in policy terms?
Well, for one thing, we need to implement the Magnitsky sanctions. This government, finally, under a huge amount of pressure, passed the Magnitsky amendment to the
which hits Russian individuals.
Which hits Russian individuals. We need to identify the ones who are responsible for building the Kerch Bridge. We need to identify all those that are responsible for organising these actions against the Ukrainian ships in the Sea of Azov. And we need to go after those people personally with asset freezes and visa bans. And we need a full implementation of the Magnitsky Act. We should also be pushing for a European-wide implementation.
Which is coming in. The Germans have yesterday said that they will back that, and the French are keen. Yeah. So that's quite a... Bill Browder, who was obviously... Sergei Magnitsky was Bill Browder's lawyer when he was killed in Russia. The Europeans have said they're going to back this.
These are the Germans who are building a new gas line.
With their gas
Russia.
Relationship, they can look both ways.
You were nodding there when Stephen Kinner.
Absolutely.
But why would Mr. Putin care? So a couple of rich oligarchs have their wealth impounded in London, sometimes through these new unexplained wealth orders and all the rest of it. And that's tough for them. And Mr. Putin says, oh, that's tough for them.
Well, it's not, I don't think, Andrew, it's not a couple of individuals. I think, when you look at money flows and some of the reports that have been written, in fact, I'm on the Foreign Affairs Select Committee and we had our own investigation and inquiry into this. It's pretty obvious that there are so many links, individuals, personnels, all link back to Putin. And it is absolutely right that the focus should be targeting individuals on a mass scale at every level in terms of even restricting their movements, what they can do,
I understand
some of their freedoms.
But we have due process in this country. That is part of being a democracy. You can't just move overnight. You could argue we should have moved long before, but you can't just move overnight to grab somebody's wealth or to stop their movement.
There are ways in
Meanwhile, there's a developing situation on the Straits of Kerch.
Which is why we should also do something else, which is G20 is coming up. Leverage our voice and status as a member of the G20 to work with our allies bilaterally, but to come together to absolutely ensure that there's one voice that's targeted in the right way. What has happened?
Sort of one strong EU voice.
Well, it has to, across the G20, to pull together now, and it's not just the EU.
It would be useful if the EU spoke with one, but of course Britain has no cash, no money in the bank in that one anymore, does it?
Well, yeah, we're apparently giving 39 billion to the EU.
It marshalled an EU response after the Skripal poisoning.
Yes, and actually quite successfully too.
And it's very difficult for me to act, or for Britain to act unilaterally at the moment, precisely because of that. And my understanding is that there's not going to be any bilats between Putin and RPM in Argentina. But there are, of course, the other members of the G20, as you'd expect, and the other members of the G20, if they can act together, led by the EU perhaps, then that's probably the best Britain can do.
We shall see if Mr. Trump cancels the meeting he was going to have with Mr. Putin as well. Whether that would bother Mr. Putin is neither here nor there. Ambassador, just before we go, these are difficult times for your country, and you need friends and allies to help you. Are you confident the West is going to be a proper friend and ally in this crisis?
No, I mean, our experience in Crimea and in Donbass were actually Russians miscalculated because they thought at some moment that there would be the same with Ukraine as with Georgia. So everything will be finished by expressing concern and that's it. But in fact, again, as I mentioned, they miscalculated. We introduced sanctions after the annexation of Crimea, after their provocative actions in Donbass, and also we know that there would be another people included in the sanctions list after the fake elections on the east of Ukraine. So this train is going in the right direction. And that's why I believe that we can still have a potential to work together.
Ambassador, thank you for being with us this morning. Now, Pretty's also going to be leaving us in a minute. I think she's going over to the Commons. We're going to let her get back there for Prime Minister's questions. And in a moment, we're going to be joined by the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liz Truss. But first, let's have a listen to Philip Hammond, the Chancellor. He was talking this morning about the Treasury's analysis, forecasts of